Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
Afreilich and Purim. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. Being that it's Purim, let's begin with dedicating part of this program to Inyane Purim, Simchas Purim, and then we'll learn continuing section of Tanya. This program is made possible by Arena Lights LLC, and it's in honor and memory of Rabbi Yosef Halevi Weinberg, Olav Shalom, Rabbi Moshe Pinchas HaKohen Katz, Olav Shalom, and Rabbi Yoel HaKohen Khan, Olav Shalom. It's also a schus and merit of Rabbi Zev Yecheskel HaKohen and Risha Katz, the Eidich Yomim B'Shalom Tevis, for many long, healthy years. Purim. So many themes about Purim. I think the most important to touch upon is those that really come alive and are so relevant to the battles that we're fighting now, which have so many parallels. And Eretz Yisrael with Hamas, people have already pointed out, it's similar sounding as Haman, the same letters, and with the same intention, Rachmana litzlan, b'chol der v'der imdim aleinu l'chalisenu, a call for the genocide and the destruction of all Eden, anoshim noshim v'taf, as Haman, Hayalesiya wanted, and as Hamas has declared. And just as then, Bayom mehem bizman hazeh, hayom me'elim niskarim v'nasim, we remember these days, and as the Arizal says, niskarim v'nasim means not just we remember, but v'nasim, we recreate. Whatever happened then is happening now. In the beautiful Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, where he says, Someone reads a Megillah backwards, they're lo yotza, they're not yotza. Now, who would read a Megillah backwards? Taishes the Baal Shem Tov, Megillah Mafrei means if you read as if it happened back then, instead of an event today, lo yotza. And the Rebbe explains, how do you reconcile that with the Pashta Pshat? Because when you read it as an event that happened back then you're reading it backwards. Because the last events of the Megillah are the ones closest to our time. If you read it frontwards, you're reading Vahi b'mei Achashverosh, that begins with that story. And then the continuing events are happening now exactly in the same order. That means you're not reading it Mafreya. So we relive and recreate, and we see the parallels. So just as then the victory was total and a complete transformation, so too now it will be La Yehudim Ha'isa Erev V'Simcha V'Sasim V'Yikar, in the deepest possible way, and this time bring us not just to the Geula like then, Akat Avdei Achashverosh, but now a Geula Mitis V'Ashlem, a complete and final and permanent redemption. So in learning some lessons, let's just start with the most obvious, which is Hashem's name is not mentioned in the Megillah. One of the explanations given for that is because the Nes of Purim was a Nes HaMelubish B'Teva. Was a miracle that was manifest within natural events. Pesach was a Nes Goli. The Makkos, the plagues, so many other things, it was very revealed. Here, if you looked on the surface, it looked like things were natural. It happened to be that Achashverosh threw a party. He happened to invite the Eden. He happened to call Vashti, summon her, and she refused. Made him angry, so he happened to kill her. Then he happened to look for a new queen, and it happened to be Esther. Mordechai happened to have overheard, was right in the right place to overhear Bixim V'Seresh, the conspiracy and plot against the king. And he saved the king's life. Now, as the story unfolds, every detail seems to be, if you were living at the time, it took a period of around 9 years, and you wouldn't have noticed anything extraordinary as far as a miracle goes. Then it happened to be that the king happened to have insomnia. And they happened to read to him what story of all stories, the story of Mordechai saving his life. So he wants to reward him. And the continuing story, and then Esther and so on. When you put together the pieces, you look backwards, you connect the dots, you suddenly see a hidden choreography, an invisible hand, Hashem's hand, but it's invisible. So Hashem's name does not appear in a revealed way in the Megillah. So too now, sometimes it may seem like there's a setback, there's definitely challenges, but we have to know that Hashem's hand is always there in all times, and that there'll be total victory, and then we'll be able to connect the dots. This is not justifying or explaining away the pain. People have died, God forbid, people have been killed, families have been shattered. But in the overall story, it will be complete transformation. One more point is the idea of, obviously, joy, the joy of Simchas Purim. A simcha adelo yada, in the words of the Gemara and the Mishnah, which is a simcha that's unbridled, unlimited, to the point of beyond yada, beyond even the rational, super-rational joy. Because of the transformation was a super-rational one. If you think about it, such a turnaround. So our joy is also such. Chassidus explains that this joy is coming from Etzem HaNefesh, like Yechida. That's why Purim and Yom Kippurim, the Tikkun Ezer says Yom Kippurim is Kippurim. Even though Yom Kippur is Achaz B'Shana, the holiest day of the year, but you could be Mamshech and Purim through Achila V'Shtiyah, through physical, material things, a meal and so on. That which on Yom Kippur we're Mamshech through tinus, through tinesim, through lack of eating and lack of involvement in the material world. That's why it's one day. That's why it's Geidel, Purim Purhu HaGeidel. Geidel like Yom Kippur as a Geidel. A Geidel is something L'mayla Matam V'das. Throwing lots. So all this indicates on the Mesiris Nefesh of Mordechai and the Eden, Lo Yichra V'Lo Yishtachve, the Jewish pride, that is so important. The world today criticizing Israel, criticizing Jews, always looking for an excuse to criticize. We do not buckle, we do not bow. We only have one God. And though at times it seems like we're dependent on other people's favors, no. We have one God, and when we don't bow, we don't bow. What happens at the end of the day? We prevail, and we're respected for it. The theme of Achdus. What's the keli for all the brachas? Achdus. Monis Levi and others comment that Purim is all about Achdus. Lech k'neis kol ha-Yehudim, Esther said. Gather them all together. Unity is the keli for bracha. And that's why all the mitzvahs of Purim are about Achdus. Shleich monis ish l're'eu, sending gifts. Matanis lavyenim, sitting together in a meal. A unifying celebration of Anoshim, Noshim, V'taf. And Haman, our very enemy, said it in the best words possible. Yeshne am echad, mefuzim mefered ben kol ha'amim. V'yam echad, v'deseim shenis mekol ha'am. The am echad. And that's what we emphasize. And finally, one more thought about the Adel Yoda says, to the point where we can't distinguish between Baruch, Mordechai, and Arur Haman. So obviously the obvious question, what does that mean? These are two very different paths. Mordechai was Kedusha, Haman was Klippa, was Ra. So one of the explanations is that you can't distinguish because you could see the Ishapcha, the transformation, also from Arur Haman. Sometimes you say, I see godliness with his beauty, with his Kedusha, but with his the opposite of it, the Haman, you don't see godliness. So we're saying Purim teaches us that even a Haman ends up causing us to have a Yom Tov Purim and being transformed. So when we have negative experiences, other Haman in our lives, we recognize that too is a bracha. Not the negative part, that which comes out of it. When we elevate it, when we transform it, when we eliminate the Ra, Shvirosin Zui Takanosim, you destroy the negative, but you extract the powerful positive. And then it's Yisr Ne'er Menachesha, the light is even greater than the light that comes in darkness. So these are central themes that Purim teaches us. And I'll conclude on about Purim being that it's always Chvivusa de Milsa, something that's close to the heart. I remember many Purims standing by the Fabrengens of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Each one was unique in its own way. The Simcha L'mayla Mid Hagbola. I remember it was around Purim, after Purim, the Shabbos, after Purim, Tovshem Memdalad, 1984. And the Rebbe spoke about the Sugi and the Gemara. Kom l'Rabbe v'shachta l'Rab Zera. And Purim, the Rabbi rose and says, he's shechted Rab Zera. Which itself is a bizarre and completely absurd story. Shechti, Pashat Shechtim. He says he slaughtered him. And then he brought him back to life. The next year he wanted to celebrate again, and he said, let's celebrate again. And Abzeda says, Lav kol yom misachas nisa, not every day miracles happen. I don't want to be slaughtered again and be revived again. So of course, all the commentaries talk about it. That year, the Rebbe spoke about it and said, but you have to understand the pshat. All the explanations, api remez, api drush, api kabbalah. And the Rebbe's explanation, which later we found in 1948 in a footnote, in a Purim Maimer, Tov Ches from Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe actually writes it briefly. The expression v'shachtel Rab Zera. Ein v'shachet elo moshach. Shchit is aliyah. It doesn't say he killed him. Shechted him. What's the aliyah? Rabbe is from the words great. Zera, Rab Zera is from the word zoyer, small. Rabbe was megalat him say the satayr. Nichnis yain yotze seid. That's Purim. Chayv inish lebsume. To drink. What's nichnis yain yotze seid? It's not frivolous drinking. He was megalat him primis satayr, and we know if you don't have the kelim for it, it can cause what's called kleis hanefesh. It can cause a total absorption, a total dissolving of the person's entity. Like what happened by Matan Torah and Purim is, of course, we know, Kimu v'kibla Yehudim, Kimu masha kiblu kfar. There's the consummation, the conclusion of Matan Torah. What happened by Matan Torah? I'll call Dibur Dibur, Porcha Nishmasam. The Dibris were so powerful that in each Dibur their souls expired. And the Eibishter had to be Mechayed and Vital Tchiyah. So Purim, that's what, so Rabbah was with the intention, obviously, to elevate him. But instead it caused him to have Kleis HaNefesh. The Rebbe then, I remember, told two stories to capture the idea. He told one story with the Rebbe Rashab, that in the years, probably Tafresh Ayin Beis approximately, Menton, south of France, where he traveled due to health reasons and other reasons. So he was, the Friedrich Rebbe says and tells us that he once went into the hotel, into the room where they were staying, and he saw his father very deep in contemplation. Okay, so I'll come back a little later. He comes back a half hour later, a while later, he's in the same position. Comes back an hour later, same position, hours long. I don't know if we know exactly the amount, but it was definitely hours, without shifting. He realized he was a completely different place. Then finally, as he started coming out of it, so to speak, the Rebbe Rashab started asking questions to the Friedrich Rebbe. The Rebbe said these words. At Gefrekt Shailas, at the Shveret Gevurz, the son, in other words, the Friedrich Rebbe, at Verstanden, and that the Rebbe Rashab basically the Bizman Mokem is. Didn't know what time and place it was. And he was trying to reorient himself. So the Friedrich Rebbe, obviously in a derechenes, respectful way, helped his father so-called re-enter the time and space of this world. So the Rebbe said this was later it said Yashemim that he was then contemplating on the structure of Hemshech Hayim Beis, the magnum opus of the Rebbe Rashab. So this is an example where a person literally can leave time and space. A dugma for this story with Rabbi and Rab Zera. Another example he gave the famous story with the Madrasa Rebbe, who needed surgery. Anesthesia was not available or wasn't around yet. It was going to be very painful. So he said, before you start the surgery, let me sing a song. When you see I get into a meditative state, into a certain type of state, and then you perform the surgery. And that's what they did. And he didn't feel it. Same thing. He brought himself to another state. The story is so amazing. I remember I was at once a Pesach program with son Ben Achar Ben, his grandson, Taub. His grandson was at the Pesach program. I said, "Do you know the story with your grandfather?" He says, "Yeah, we all know it. We know exactly where it happened. And they even know the song." Two examples for this state. So Purim, what you see from that, is actually an elevated state of consciousness. Now, sometimes it takes a negative experience to bring us there. And that's what happened on Purim, and that's what we try to recreate, obviously. That's why the next year Rabbah said to Rab Zera, let's experience it again, because Rabbah's intention was not Chaz B'Shalom. But I love Kol Yom Yisrachash Nis, not every time there's a Rotzeh, you have to bring the Rotz back into a Shuv. That's a Nes. Because you could also, God forbid, we know the four that went into the Pardes, or Nodav and Avihu. They all in with deep av, as the Eira Chaim says, and deep love and passion, but the soul can expire. Our goal, Purim, is obviously that the neshama is begufim, and we eat a meal, and we ground it all. So may we all experience this type of level of ad liyad, lamayla medas, heschadas, to be a keli for ein Mashiach bo ela behes chadas, hamshacha that which is beyond structure into the structure of existence, nadira b'tachtein. So with that, everyone have a freilich and Purim, and it should only be simchas by Eden. Simchas Begoli B'Teva Nira V'Nigla, Hashem should protect, as He did always during the time of Purim and always, the Eden in Eretz Yisrael, especially the Eden everywhere, especially our soldiers on the front lines who are fighting and to defend and protect our men, women, and children. And with that, being that, that's the Eino Tadid. The Tadid is the Kavud thing. We learned some Tanya, so let's dedicate the rest of this program to Tanya. Tanya is, of course, Primis HaTeireh, so it's fitting very well to Purim. We'll learn a little Primis HaTeireh, Nichnis Yayin Yotze Seid. If we know Yayin is Gematria Sod. So, we are up to in middle of chapter 18, which actually talks about L'mayla Mitam V'das Taka. Ava Misateres. That every Yid has within him a dormant, innate love because of his direct connection to Elokus. So in Perek Beis, we learned about that direct connection, Chelik Elokam and Malmamish, and all the explanations of it. In some ways, Perek Yud Ches, I don't say a cousin to chapter 2, but it has similar ideas. But here the focus is not just that we are Chelik Elokam and Malmamish, but as a result of that, we have an Ava Mesuteres. So in addition to all the work that we do through Avodah, that we learned earlier in Tanya, especially chapters 12 through 17, and specifically in the chapters 15 and 16, 17, all about the Avodah of what? Of being contemplating on Elokus and godliness, in order to awaken and give birth to Midas, to love and reverence, Ava and Yira. Here we're talking about the innate love, which then makes the Korav Elecha Dover Ma'id even more profound, and especially with the focus on the word Ma'id, as he said in the beginning of the chapter. The taste was beer by hate the milas Ma'id Shabbaposli Korav Elecha Dover Ma'id. Even for someone who doesn't have the capacity, Misha Daitik Tzari B'Yidis Hashem Ve'en Lev Lehev B'Gdulas Ein Sof Baruch Hu Lehelim Men Tchila Rechimu Afal became Korav Elecha Dover Ma'id Lishmer Lasas Kol Mitzvos, due to Ba'umke Deliba, every person, due to the Ava Mesuteres that a person, that every Yid has, that's a Yerusha Ma'aviseinu. Yerusha Lona Ma'aviseinu. And then he began to explain what that means, the Yerusha. That due to the fact that the Ovis were Hein Hein Amarkova, they dedicated their lives entirely, so Zochu, they were merited to pass on their work didn't just remain with them, it became part of their genetic makeup, part of their DNA, passed on to their children, like he says, the Zochu. He says, and how are they mamshech it? As it's through the 10 spheres that go through all the 4 elements, all the way down even to the lowest world of Asiya. So every person, every neshama Yisrael, one way or another is connected. Even if it's a neshama of Malchus da Asiya, like he said, which may be children of Kal Shebekal and Pesha Yisrael, Madrega Tachtena Shebekdushas Asiya, but within it, in the language of Tanya, within that, Alpha became, even though it's a being that is coming from the Esther Spheres Kadeshus, a channeling from the Ovis, which is Klulis Mekulin, all the spheres encompass them all. Gama Chochmed Asiya, within which is also Chochma of Malchus of Atzilus, within which is Chochmed Atzilus, within which is Erein Sof Baruch. So he doesn't stop by Chochmah. Chochmah itself is a high level because we want to have not just Chochmah, but we want to have the Ava Mesuteres that's connected to the divine source. Ein Esei Baruch Hu, like he says, Hashem b'Chochmah Yosad Aretz v'Kulam b'Chochmah Sisa v'Nimtza ki Ein Esei Baruch Hu Malubish b'Chinas Chochmah shebenefesh Adam Yeh Meshiyeh. So what do we take away from this? That Ein Esei Baruch Hu itself manifests in Chachma, the nefesh of the Adam, whoever it may be, every Yid, without exception. And from Chachma, the Chachma within him, with the Erein Sof that manifests in the Chachma, that mispashetes, extends and expresses itself in all the nefesh kulim, like we see, like the central nervous system that begins in the Chachma, in the mind, manifests through the whole entire being, la'chiesa, l'b'chinas reisha ad b'chinas ragla, from head to toe, from his head to his foot. Kediksiv ha'chochma techaya ba'aleha. Ba'aleha. The chochma mechaya ba'aleha, as he teaches here, that means it gives life to those who possess it, which in this case is referring to those that receive from Chachma. They receive this level of Ein Sei Baruch Hu, and therefore every person has this Ava Misoteres that he's been talking about through the earlier section of this chapter. So let's continue from where we left off. And as I said, if you look in Perek Beis, it parallels the same idea. The difference is there he doesn't talk about the Ava Misoteres and that Yerusha. There he talks about the very neshama, the chelik alikam b'mal mamish that we get straight from Hashem. He does talk about Talmidei Chachamim, that it comes through them, but he doesn't talk about the Ovis. So the Ovis clearly add a whole dimension. Tzemach Tzedek explains that they add the point, not just that we're getting Chachma, the Elikus within Chachma, we're getting also the Elikus that's higher than Chachma, as we shall learn in the later section, the second part of this chapter. But then the Alter Rebbe adds a bracket here. And here's what he says. This bracket essentially is coming to emphasize that which we learned before, that no matter which neshama, even Kal Shebekalim and Peish Yisrael, which means even very, very low-level souls, and even sinful people, also have and can pass on neshama to their children. So now he's going to explain that Al Pizeh, it says like this. Since they all have, even in Nefesh, the Nefesh of Asiyah, have Chochmah of Asiyah, Chochmah of Malchus of Atzilus, and Chochmah of Atzilus, which has Ein Sei Baruch Hu. That's why Lepomim Mamshichim Peish Yisrael Neshamas Gveis Ma'id Shahoyu Be'imkei Aklipus. Sometimes, even sinful Jews, God forbid, will draw down very lofty souls. Mamshichim Peish Yisrael, that these Peish Yisrael Neshamas Gveis made very lofty souls, Shahoyu Be'imkei Aklipus, which had been trapped in the depths of the Klippus. Like he writes in the Sefer Gilgulim, which is from the Arizal, chapter 32. So let's explain what this means. The obvious question when you read it is, why is this relevant here? However, the Rebbe makes it clear, the relevance is because it explains this manifests what we learned before, and also we have now explanation for it. Because you would think, and let's start with the Kisva Arizal. What does he say? That a person, God forbid, becomes a Peish Yisrael, a sinful person. What does it mean? Even though he has a beautiful divine soul within him, but has become trapped. Think of someone in captivity. Beautiful person is now taken captive. In this case, due to his mistakes and due to his behavior, his bad behavior, his neshama is now trapped. Be'imkei aklipus. And when he's trapped there, they don't want to release him. He's now under their control. We learned earlier that a person has free will. End of chapter 11, and later I believe in chapter 15. And a person this can happen to a person. We learned where we talked, even we learned in chapter, what was it, in chapter we said that a person, that his einish is, due to his bad behavior, is that he can't get out of this dark place. It was not chapter 15. I believe it was chapter, let me look it up. We spoke about that's why he has to do tshuva first. Let's see, I think it was last chapter, chapter 17. Yeah, my mistake, chapter 17. So he said like this. He spoke about a Rosh V'Ralei, a person whose libam bereshusam, and a Rasha whose heart controls him. the opposite of a tzaddik, and not even like a Beini who has at least moich shal lev. Sharashem hem b'reshus liba. Rosha be'emes, ve'en libim b'reshusam klal, v'zeh einish al gedel ve'etzim aveinam v'loy dibrateda b'mesim el shebachayim kriyim mesim. So he's talking about people who become trapped in a place, and due to the einish, it's not allowing them, that's the einish, not allowing them to regain their self-control. We gave the example of an addict. Someone is addicted. So in the beginning, he wasn't addicted, but once he became addicted, he's trapped. Imkei klippus. Just an example of what it means by imkei klippus. Okay. However, continues that Izal, but these people can come back down below, and the klippus allowed that because they're assuming the children that will grow from these people will not be necessarily on a high level. But there are times that's not the case. That Peish Yisrael will give birth great neshamas. And the Tzemach Tzedek gives an example, like Avram, who was born from Terach. So the question is, how is that possible? And the answer is because the neshama comes from Chachma Vatzilis and from Erein Sof Baruch Hu within it. Every neshama. Even those that come into Nefesh of Asiyah, that are born to children of Kalsha, Bekalim, and Peish Yisrael. And therefore, that's why Mamshich and Peish Yisrael, even neshama is Gvoyes Ma'id. So it's not just theoretical, they actually bring neshamas Gvoyes Ma'id, even though they themselves were trapped. Because the neshama, ultimately, its essential nature is never compromised. That teaches you a tremendous nekuda here in this Ava Misoteres. And why is the Alter Rebbe adding it? Because he wants to show the extent of how that of how every neshama, no matter who, even one that comes from Peish Yisrael, from a sinner, God forbid, a sinful person, also retains that Ava Misoteres. Therefore, Karev Elecha Davar Me'ed to everybody. And everybody could do tshuva, like he explains in the previous chapter, and reach these highest levels. So that's the addition of this bracket. Now, the Alter Rebbe in Perek Beis also brings this idea, but that we'll discuss in the next shir, the distinction between the two things, because he brings the same idea, but we'll discuss that in the next shir. TanyaApplied.com is where you can find this and all previous programs. Everyone have a freilichen Purim, a freilichen Tamid, and we should really be zeicher to the simcha, mismach, geula mitis v'ashlema.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chasidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.